morning, everyone. Welcome to the March 10th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Molkowski, and we are looking ahead to the big Saturday of racing at Tampa Bay Downs. Plenty of stakes racing on tap. Their future is, of course, the Grade 3 Tampa Bay Derby, their major Kentucky Derby prep race, that one offering 50 Kentucky Derby qualifying points to the winner of that race, and a field of 12 signed on, though. Despite the big field, I think we're going to have a heavy favorite in the Tampa Bay Derby. We'll get to that a little bit later in this podcast, but Craig, we're going to go over the Pick 5 sequence, races 7 through 11, culminating in that Tampa Bay Derby, which is the 11th race. All stakes events, a few of them graded, turf and dirt in this sequence, actually 3 turf races to talk about. And, I mentioned that big favorite in the Tampa Bay Derby because there are a few favorites throughout this sequence, Craig, that I think people are probably going to lean on. And I think we can have a discussion about how solid they really are and whether these are courses that you do want to have most of your play going through. But I think there are some races where we might want to take some shots.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's a really interesting card. I don't think there's too many gimmies at all. Like you said, maybe there's some horses that might look like they're heavy favorites, but I'm going to be spreading a little bit in some of those races. And just a good card. No real short fields. I think only one race has 7. All the others are pretty full. So it's an interesting sequence.
Yeah, I would call this a player-friendly sequence. I mean, first of all, it has a low 15% takeout, which I think we don't often mention enough on this podcast, but when we talk about these Pick 5 sequences, we should make that part of our conversation, and this late Pick 5 at Tampa is a good one for the players. And on top of that, I think these are races where we can get a little bit creative, and those are the kinds of races that are good to have in a Pick 5 sequence where you have stronger opinions about horses that are going to be bigger prices. And we talked about a couple of these races already, Craig, on our stakes previews that we do for DRF.com and their YouTube channel, so you can check those out if you want some in-depth looks into some of these races, talking about more contenders than we'll probably cover on this podcast. But I think Craig and I are both going to be heading in that direction in a few of these races. So let's start with race 7. This is one of those turf stakes. It's the Columbia for 3-year-olds going 1 mile on the grass course, a field of 10 signed on, and I would call this one of the more competitive races in the sequence for 2 reasons. There are, I would say, 5 or 6 strong contenders, and also no clearly defined favorite. I don't see any horse in this race that's going to be taking most of the money. It feels like it's going to be pretty spread around.
Yeah, no doubt. And you can see it in the morning line, a tepid morning line favorite at 3-1, and then just kind of stair steps every 0.5 odds, 7-2, 4-1, 9-2, and then jumps to 6-1. So it seems like the morning line maker had the same feelings that we did. I guess we should start with the favorite. Drawn inside, the 1 horse seems a logical spot, and this is a horse that I think might be one of those you were talking about that could get overbet just because of Irad Ortiz, and people tend to default to these kind of horses. He's a horse who hasn't lost on turf. They tried him on the dirt as his last race as a 2-year-old, I guess just to see, as you want to do with 3-year-olds. And I'm not sure that avenue's even completely closed. That was a really weirdly run Kentucky Jockey Club. But he's back on turf here. Doesn't have the greatest speed figures in the world. I think there's some others. He certainly can win. We know he's going to get a good trip from that inside post almost assuredly. But there's some others in here I think that we need to talk about.
Yeah, I think the thing that could be working in the favor of Freedom Trail in this race is it does feel like there's a good amount of speed signed on here. I'm looking at the TimeformUS pace projector, and we are predicting a fast pace in this race, and I could see it transpiring that way. I mean, there are horses like a Western Yarn, and Worthington has some speed. Mo Stash is coming out of speed in some sprint races, so I could see horses like that being forward. I don't know how quickly they're going to be going, but what we do know about Freedom Trail is that he has a big late kick. We saw that when he won that stakes race 2 back at Aqueduct in the Awad. He had a lot of ground to make up at the top of the stretch, and he just kept coming at the end to mow those horses down. I do get the sense he's pretty good, and those were just 2-year-old speed figures, so with routine improvement, he certainly can take a step forward, and I am looking at the new version of the TimeformUS pace projector, and I see he's got that late pace flag, so you do want to pay attention to that, the best closer in a field where a fast pace is predicted. So there are definitely some reasons to like Freedom Trail, and I would not be against him in this first leg, but there are some other horses that I would want to use. This is just the kind of race where, knowing I have opinions later on in the sequence, I want to get through it. I don't love anybody in this field, but there are multiple horses that I would want to use. I'll mention a couple towards the outside, Craig. The number 9 Mo Stash is another one that could take plenty of money, and I have mixed feelings about this horse. His first 3 starts were in sprint races and ran okay in all of them. They took a shot last time in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf where he went off at upwards of 50-1 and actually ran a big race, striking the lead in mid-stretch before getting run down at the end. Lost that race by 3 lengths, but for me, Craig, that's a pretty large 3 lengths as far as 3 lengths go, because the first 2 finishers in that race, Victoria Road and Silver Knot, a couple of Europeans, they were just so much superior to the Americans in that field, so he held on for 4th and sort of a blanket finish to close out the Superfecta, but I don't know how well he really ran there. I'm not sure I'm convinced that he really wants to go the mile.
I agree completely. Of the horses that are kind of short, I think he's the second choice at 7-2. He's the one that I would have the least good things to say. I think he's probably a closing sprinter, and he's even shown speed. I shouldn't say a closing sprinter. I just think he's more of a sprinter type. He ran fine in that race, but it wasn't the strongest field, as you say. The 2 that finished 1-2 were much the best. He's not facing anything like that here, but I just wonder if he's really that good. And as you say, he's likely to be up near the front end, and this is a race that does feature plenty of other speed. Of those 2 outside horses, I much prefer the one to his outside, Talk of the Nation for Shug McGahee. He comes in with the best last race speed figure. Now, that can be a little tricky. As you noted, Freedom Trails figures come from way back in October of his 2-year-old season, so there's probably not as big a gap as you would think. When you see a 110 to a 97, they're probably pretty close. But I really liked what I saw from him, the way he pulled away. He had good tactical speed. The post is a little bit of a concern here, but given the amount of speed in this race, I have a feeling this field's kind of going to spread out. He should be able to get maybe a 2-wide trip, and I think he's probably the horse to beat.
Yeah, I think Talk of the Nation makes a lot of sense in this race. Got a big speed figure last time, whether you look at the buyers or the TimeformUS numbers. He's coming in as the fastest horse in this race. And when I went back and watched that allowance victory at Tampa, I was expecting to be a little more impressed than I was, because on paper it looks like this horse had a big turn of foot, and when you watch it, it's more of a grinding victory. He had to be asked really hard from a long way out, but he was the kind of horse that just kept responding to that pressure, and the more the rider asked, the more he gave, so he was really running through the wire. He had built up a lot of speed by that point, but it took a lot of encouragement for him to get there, so he is kind of one of those bicycle horses that needs to be ridden a little bit, but he certainly took to the turf last time. That was no surprise based on his pedigree. The dam side is really all turf. It's actually the female family of Zenyatta, which if you know that female family, it's very turfy. So Talk of the Nation looks like one that is well meant in this spot for Shug McGahee, a trainer that tends to get horses to improve. So I think he looks legitimate. Another horse I want to mention, Craig, the number 2, Sendero, who I know doesn't look quite as competitive based on his last couple of speed figures, but a couple things going on here. 2 back, he had no chance just based on what happened in the stretch of that race. He was actually getting what looked like a winning trip coming to the quarter pole and clearly had a ton of horse, but just got completely sawed off in traffic when Irad tried to squeeze through on the inside. And it's the kind of 8th by 16 lengths finish that easily could have been a 2nd by 1 length or potentially even a win, because he looked like he had a ton of horse at the time that he got caught in traffic. And last time, they tried some different tactics, just ripping him way off the pace and making this big late run. I'm not sure that was the smartest move because he sort of ran out of ground at the end of that race. This horse has more tactical speed than that, and I think maybe this time they can strike the happy medium by being more aggressive and hopefully not having that traffic trouble.
Yeah, I have no problems with him at all. He's definitely going to be on my tickets. That race 2 back, as you said, it was a total line through. Now, had he gotten through, we'd be saying, oh, he ran a good race, but he also got a perfect trip. But I think he's ran just fine since, and he's definitely a contender, gets a good inside draw. The only other horse I wanted to mention was the 5 Lights of Broadway. And what kind of intrigues me with him is that he has been gelded, it appears, since his last start. Hopefully it wasn't before the last start. Off of that poor performance, I suspect it was. And what intrigues me is it's one where he's a horse who showed some real talent, running second in the Pulpit Stakes back in December. So it seems to me like this is a horse who they just thought they had to geld for whatever reason. I assume he just doesn't act right and a little too studdish. And I'm thinking maybe it could help because he ran a nice speed figure that day in the Pulpit, and he's one I want to give another chance.
I don't know about the gelding, Craig, to be honest. Florida is one of the circuits, especially Gulfstream, that is particularly bad with reporting that stuff. And he did have a layoff prior to the start two back where it seems more likely he got gelded. He had a workout 14 days after his last effort. So I know that the recovery time for gelding procedures isn't super long, but the fact that he worked just 2 weeks later says to me maybe that gelding procedure happened months ago rather than between these last two races. I don't know. His last race was bad, so that's a concern for me as well. I mean, if there's an excuse for it, then maybe he could turn it around because he ran fine two back. But for me, he's a little hard to take off the last effort, and I don't trust that first-time gelding that we see in the past performances. The other horse that I'll mention, Craig, is another price, and that's the number 3, a Western Yarn. He's going to have to get faster for sure, but he's just the kind of horse that seems to be improving with every race. I know that he ran a similar TimeformUS speed figure last time to the one as the previous race, but just visually, he won that race with something left last time, and just seems like a horse that has really improved with the stretch out on the turf, and he's going to get a real class test here, but the kind of horse that could get dismissed at a price in this race that I would want to have included somewhere on my tickets.
Yeah, and what I would say about him on the pace projector, we show the horses kind of stacked three across the three, a Western Yarn, Worthington the 7, and the 9 Mustache, who we've talked about. But if I had to pick one horse I thought was going to be on the lead, it would probably be him from that more inside post. He seems like a more natural front runner, and that can always be dangerous.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not anticipating this being necessarily a pace collapse situation. That would obviously work for Freedom Trail, but even though that pace projector looks very competitive, I agree with what you said, Craig. They only need the lead type of those horses showed up front appears to be a Western Yarn, so I would imagine he gets the most aggressive ride, and maybe that'll work to his benefit. Let's move on to the 8th race. This is back over to the dirt course. It's the Grade 3 Challenger, this one going a mile and a 16th for the older horses. And I find this to be a difficult race, Craig, for pick 5 ticket construction because the number 2, Skippy Longstocking, is going to be a heavy favorite. He's, I think, 8-5 on the morning line. I'm not going to be surprised when he's even money or less in this race. And I have some reservations about this horse. He can be a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde type. I mean, when he's good, he's really good. But when he's bad, he can be pretty disappointing. And you kind of don't know what you're going to get from him from race to race. And when you look at his big speed figures that are showing, few of them look a little bit shaky. I mean, we've talked a little bit about that Harlan's Holiday 2 back when he got, I think, a career best 126. And that's a number that I know even you have some doubts about. We've just seen horses not really run back to it. Even the horse that ran well out of that race, Pioneer of Medina, ran a lower speed figure next time. So that's just a tricky race to make a figure for that mathematically seemed fast, but might be a little bit inflated. His other big effort was in the West Virginia Derby over a sloppy track. And he's the kind of horse that when he's gotten those class tests, he has not really lived up to those big efforts that he's put forth against weaker company. Now, he's in a weaker race now, so this is supposedly when he's supposed to run well. It's just, he's trained by Saffie Joseph, and there has been a story out recently that Saffie Joseph had a medication positive. He's going to be suspended, or he's appealing it at least. I don't know, Craig. It's just one of these things that you pick up a feel for doing this game for a long time. Not saying there's anything nefarious going on. We don't know anything, but it seems like whenever news breaks of a trainer getting a suspension or a medication positive, that trainer just ends up going through a cold spell after that news breaks. It's just something I've seen happen time and time again, and I'm wary of this horse at a very short price being reliable in this pick 5 sequence.
It's very tricky. I agree with you. I don't know if he's definitely not a horse I would want to lean on. It just comes down to do you want to use him or not? And I think if you want to get through the sequence, maybe you do, but I think you have to be pretty wise about how you play your tickets because he's going to be a short price. And you don't want to have him on a ticket where you got a bunch of other favorites as well. So I would look to maybe use him as a lesser type with some of my price opinions, but I'm with you. I'm not so high on him. It seems like a not the most ambitious spot. As you say, he has been kind of a bully type horse where he runs his best races against weaker competition and then doesn't really run very well when he steps up. But I'm a little lukewarm on him. I do think that West Virginia Derby, that figure has held up, but it was in the slop, as you note. The Harlan Holiday, we will see. It's still kind of out there. Looks a little high at this point. There are some others too that I think could give him a run, much more so than the Harlan's Holiday. Pioneer Medina that day, I don't think he was fully cranked. He's come back to run well, but I think there are some others, and I'll start with the horse who's drawn right to the inside, Trademark. Um, he's a horse who just, I'm not sure what happened with him for Vicky Oliver. He showed some talent early in his career. I think he had won a couple races in a row. They got a little ambitious with him. Tried a couple Derby preps 2 or 3 times. Didn't really work out. Seemed to set him way back. And then suddenly the light just went on these last couple starts. And he's won races at Keeneland and Churchill with huge speed figures, both 120 plus. And I think he has to be taken pretty seriously because once maybe you could say it was a fluke, but twice it seems like the light bulb went on.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that horse in just a second. Just to wrap up Skippy Longstocking, yeah, Craig, I agree with what you said about his form and those speed figures. Obviously, I'm not just saying that about Saffie Joseph because, I think anything was happening with this horse. It's just, I'm looking at the data. I mean, I looked up his stats in Formulator for the past month. The past month, Saffie Joseph's ROI is $1.19. He hasn't been winning at the rate that you expect him to win at. And also, check out this horse's work tab. This is a horse that throughout his career has been known as like a bullet in the morning. When he's doing well, he's working 46, 58, 5 furlong workouts. I mean, that's just been this horse. And he's coming in with this work tab full of pedestrian workouts. I don't know if they're going easy on him because there's an issue or what, but it's just so markedly different from what I remember seeing for this horse prior to all of his prior races. So there were just red flags for me with Skippy Longstocking, enough so that I do want to be against him in this pick 5 sequence. And I wanted to be more a fan of Trademark than I ended up being, Craig. Yeah, he's got those 2 big speed figures in his last couple of races, and clearly he's in career form right now. That last figure I have some problems with. It was an off-the-turf race. The number just really doesn't make sense for anybody else in the race except for Trademark. I mean, a Stolen Base has been a turf horse in his entire life, and I don't know if I buy that he's suddenly a 118 speed figure horse on the dirt. Those off-the-turf races, in general, to me, are a little bit unreliable. The good news is he also produced that figure 2 back, so I think you can rely on that one a little more. That seems like a legitimate effort. He made the first move into a fast pace that day, and that seems like a rock-solid number, even though he won at 23-1. I wonder a little bit about him on the class rise. Victoria Oliver, she winters in Tampa every year. Not a trainer that has a particularly high ROI at Tampa. I think it's 75 cents on $2 over the past 5 years. So probably not where this trainer is having, their horses most cranked up for this meet. So I wonder if this is just a starting point for his 4-year-old campaign. He can win, and he's probably going to be a much better price than Skippy Longstocking, so I could get interested in him from that value standpoint, but I wanted to look elsewhere. The number 4 Classic Causeway, I think, is pretty intriguing in here, and he could be the second choice in this race, but I think he's going to be a much better price than Skippy Longstocking, and I think his chances of winning this race are actually pretty good. I know that they made him into a turf horse in the second half of last year, and he ran well in the turf a number of times, but it's not like he was a bad dirt horse prior to that. I mean, he ran a 123 in that Ohio Derby. I know that hasn't been a number that's been validated that much by runbacks, but I mean, we have seen Tawny Port come back to reproduce that figure, White Abario, and even before that, Classic Causeway as an early season 3-year-old was running well in races at Tampa, earning speed figures in the 110 range. So with natural improvement, you're supposed to expect he can run figures that'll make him competitive in a spot like this. And I like him switching back to the dirt here. I think his early speed is gonna play very well on this surface. And also, he's getting first-time Lasix. And, I've posted some Lasix stats for different trainers, and one that really sticks out is Ken McPeak. Ken McPeek coming off Lasix, you want to stay away. But when Ken McPeek was putting Lasix on, he has great stats. First time Lasix with non-maidens over the past 5 years, he's winning at 18% with a $2.64 ROI. In stakes races within that sample, he's 5 for 15 with a $3.64 ROI. So he's a trainer that gets horses to improve going on Lasix for the first time. So I think that's important to note with Classic Causeway, and I like this spot for him.
Yeah, he's actually my top pick, and you stole a lot of my thunder. I'll keep it short because you said a lot of the same things I was gonna say. I still think he's better on the dirt. I know he won that Belmont Derby, and to me that was still kind of a fluke. I don't know what happened that day, how the others let him get away. He won it fair and square. Don't get me wrong, but those were 3 year olds. Fairly early in the season. It wasn't the strongest field. It didn't really work out for him the rest of the year, and I kind of just have always liked his dirt form. He was going in the right direction. Something clearly went wrong last year between the Tampa Derby and the Florida Derby. He didn't run at all. I remember he wasn't really supposed to run in the Kentucky Derby up until the last week, I think. They decided to put him in for whatever reason. It didn't seem like there was any real plan to try to win because he was a speed horse who showed absolutely no speed, wasn't even persevered with at all. So something just wasn't right at the time. He switched barns. He's been a different horse, and I just really like to turn back to dirt. And it's not the strongest field, as we said. Um, just a couple others I wanted to talk about here. One horse who really confuses me quite often is Tax. He's a horse who just, his races are littered with layoff lines after he had been kind of an iron horse as a 2 and a 3 year old. He just kept showing up for all the dances, but ever since then, it's just a lot of layoffs, occasional good race mixed in, but he's a horse I just don't trust at 4-1. I'm not sure I would even have him on my tickets.
I'm going to mention a couple more horses because I completely agree with you on Tax, and I've been more negative than positive on most of the horses that we've talked about so far. So I want to throw out some bigger prices that I'm going to use. In addition to Classic Causeway, who's my top pick, I think we've established that. And sorry for stepping on your toes, Greg.
No,
I'll try not to do that in the next couple of races where I think I know where you're going. But number 8, Business Model. I know he looks a little slow on the speed figures. There's quite a bit of speed in this race, though, and if things fall apart, he just seems like the kind of horse that's going to be grinding away at the end and picking up the pieces. Maybe it's not good enough to win. Often it isn't good enough to win, but this is the kind of race where I'm not convinced that it necessarily has to come back that fast, and I could see this horse, especially with the switch to Luis Saez, just continuing to grind away and getting a big piece of this and potentially winning. So I've always thought this horse had some ability. He's arguably been a little bit disappointing, but I think that this is an interesting race for him where he might be able to shine. Another horse that I want to mention at a gigantic price who's, I get it, way more of a reach, but he's just the kind of horse that I think is going to offer a little bit of value in this race, so I want to mention him even if you just use him as a B or C type in your pick 5. That's the number 5, Surely Furious, I guess is how you say it. I know he looks like more of a synthetic horse because that's where most of his winning has happened, but this horse actually ran really well in the last dirt route that he ran. That was a 1-turn mile at Churchill Downs in the ACAC, and he carved out some legitimate fractions that day and got tired at the end, but was beaten by some good horses, and Senior Buscador and even Injunction, who can pop with big speed figures every now and then. He's come off the layoff and run twice so far this year, and neither one of those races was the right spot. I mean, he had no chance to get involved early in that Mr. Prospector sprint at Gulfstream 2 back when Sibelius was just blazing the path on the front end, so I'm not going to hold that race against him. And the turf sprint last time going 5 furlongs, I mean, again, he just doesn't have the speed for that kind of race. I think this horse is better going a little bit longer, and I think he's fine on the dirt, even though he hasn't necessarily won on this surface. So he's going to be, I think, 20-30-1 in this race, and he's the kind of horse that I want to use somewhere.
Yeah, I've got no problem with him. I'll be honest. I was about to be furious with you if, and when you were talking about a big price, I thought you were going to go with Brooklyn Strong, and I was probably going to turn off the mic for a little while and go get a coffee. But no, sure, for sure, Surly Furious, you make a good case. He's going to be a huge price, I would say, probably bigger than that morning line, and his race in the YAC is not that far off some of the real contenders in here, the top contenders.
Thankfully, I've signed those divorce papers with Brooklyn Strong long ago, so hopefully he doesn't come back to bite me in this spot. Let's move on to another turf race, the Grade 2 Hillsborough. This is race 9, the middle leg of this pick 5 sequence, going 1.1 miles on the turf. This is one of the races that Craig and I did a video for on DRF's YouTube channel, and 3 Chad Brown runners in this race, Craig. A couple of them are already Grade 1 winners, though I think you would debate the legitimacy of one of those Grade 1 races that one of his horses has won. The one to beat is definitely the number 6 Shantasara. She's just got a little bit of a class edge over this field, has consistently high speed figures. I think there is some question as to whether she's really gotten back to that stellar form that we saw from her during her 3-year-old season, and there have been some substantial layoffs for her coming into this race, particularly when she was off for most of 2022 and prior to that, but she definitely is the one that has the best class and speed figure credentials coming in.
She does. She's had several 120 pluses. I think 4 of her last 5. The one disappointment was when she came off about a 6-month layoff. I think it was the race after the Breeders' Cup Classic, if memory serves, where she was beat at even money that day by Wakanaka. Didn't really run at all. I did think her race in the Pegasus on Pegasus Day was pretty good. Queen Goddess, the horse that beat her, is obviously in really good form. She's a horse that I know both of us liked that day, so I don't have too many knocks on Shantasara. The big thing is, what kind of value are you going to get? Because she's going to be bet down to probably 7 or 8 to 5.
Yeah, I agree with that. She seems like the one that's going to take a lot of money in this race, and even though she's going to be a very short price, Craig, I have more faith in her than I do Chad Brown's other horse that's likely to take money, the number 4 Rougier. And I know we've talked about her a number of times on our stakes previews and podcasts, and neither one of us has ever been the biggest fan of this horse. She came to the U.S. with a big reputation last year and just never really panned out after winning that Beaugay. And I know she eventually got that Grade 1 in the E.P. Taylor and did have some trouble that day, but she had to grind out that victory, and turning back to the 1 1/8, I'm not sure that really works for her. She just is going to need a lot to go right to be successful here, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of hers. The only way I would use her would be if there was a lot of give in the ground. The 2 times she's won in North America, the TimeformUS track condition rating has been pretty low, 6 and a 7. And a 7 at Woodbine is quite a bit of give for that course, because that's a really fast course most of the time. So, yeah, I'm just not the biggest fan of her. That E.P. Taylor, no way it was really a Grade 1. It had only a 113 TimeformUS race rating, which is barely even listed stakes, to be honest. So, of the Chad Browns, I much prefer Shantasara. The couple other horses I think we have to talk about are the 3 Temple City Terror, who comes in off a couple graded stakes wins. Good speed figures. 3 of her last 4 have been 120 pluses. The real question that I think you have to have with her, and I'll let you talk about it because I know we've done the video and you do, is the distance question. She's a horse who's been thriving at 11 and 12 furlongs, and now she cuts back to 9. And how do you think she's going to handle that?
Yeah, it's definitely a question, and I don't have the answer for sure, but I do feel like she's a horse that could get a little lost on the board in this race, even though she's coming in great form. The 2 Chad Brown runners, they have to take money, particularly Shantasara. And I also think the number 7 is going to take plenty of money in this race, Scottish Star, who a lot of people are going to perceive as the lone speed. So I think there's a chance that the number 3 Temple City Terror gets a little bit lost in that shuffle and people view this as just a prep race, and maybe it is. But I would say she has really improved in the overall sense over the past 12 months or so. I mean, from where she started in 2022 to where she ended up, she got so much better, and she was winning those races like the Dowager and the Long Island with such ease. I mean, she traveled into those races with such confidence, and the way that she finished, it was just so much more powerful than we had seen from her in the past. I mean, some of her marathon victories in 2021, I mean, it was more of a grinding effort. Races fell into her lap. Not so much the case the last couple of times where she was just so much the best in those races. So I feel like she really was doing the best that she's ever done at the end of last year. Now they're coming off the layoff. It's not like this is a flat mile. It's a 1 1/8, so she does get to make use of some of her stamina, and she fits well with this field on speed figures. So I think she's a legitimate player in this race. And like I was saying in our preview, if she's 7-2, I'm not that interested in her, but I think she's going to be 5 or 6-1. And to me, that's fair value on her. And Craig, I know you're interested in another horse that's coming off a little bit of a layoff with questions to answer, but I agree with you on the number 5's Gam's Mission, who I'll allow you to make a case for.
Yeah, before I get to her, I'll start with the 7, who you briefly mentioned, Scottish Star. On our pace projector, she's shown on a clear early lead, and I really have no argument with that. The horse who's shown in second is Shanty Sara, and that right there should tell you. I mean, she's a horse who's never had the lead early. She does have good tactical speed, but I think it is Scottish Star's race to lead. There's little doubt. The question is, I just don't think she's good enough. Her speed figures, even when she runs her best races, just are a notch below some of the others in here, particularly Temple City Terror and Shanty Sara. So while I am a guy who loves speed, she's not really the kind of horse for me. I just don't think she could finish it off on the turf. Maybe more of if you had that situation on dirt. Gam's Mission is one that I'm definitely interested in. She's coming in off a long layoff for Cherie DeVoe. I'm not worried about that part at all. You gave a formulator stat of just how well she does off the layoff. Not a huge surprise. She used to be assistant trained, the top assistant for the Chad Brown barn. They certainly know how to get them ready. Cherie DeVoe has continued that, and you could argue her stats are even a little better with a smaller sample. It's something she excels in. And Gam's Mission has just been a horse who almost always runs a good race. She has speed figures that compete. She's just a newly turned 5-year-old. We haven't seen her since early season 4-year-old, so I think there's still some room to grow. And like Temple City Terror, she's going to offer a lot more value. There is the question of the layoff. I don't ever think it's a great sign when you go to the bench off a graded stakes win. It was over that kind of goofy Churchill Downs course, but she's shown she could run well elsewhere. She had run a really good race at Keeneland the time before that when narrowly beaten in an allowance race. So I definitely have some interest in her as well.
Yeah, and one thing that I posited in our preview that I'll repeat here, I don't know this for sure, it's just a guess on my part, but I wonder if the number 1 California Queen is going to get ridden aggressively here. Chad Brown has 3 runners. She seems like the one that is the most hopeless of those 3. And sometimes what Chad will do is look at his other 2 and say, these have a better chance to win if I'm more aggressive with California Queen. And frankly, California Queen might have a better chance to win if they're aggressive with her. So I wouldn't be surprised if she's the one that tries to put some pressure on the number 7 Scottish Star early. So maybe that's a little bit of a wrinkle in the tactics for this race that you might want to consider. And Craig, I agree with everything you said about Gam's Mission. My one reservation with Gam's Mission is the rider. I don't want to be hard on Julien Leparoux, but I'll say for a horse that's been ridden by 2 of the strongest riders in the game in terms of physical strength, Adam Beschizza and Luis Saez, I mean, they really pump away on a horse when they're trying to get it going. It's a stark difference between how Julien Leparoux rides a horse and how they do. So that's just my one concern with Gam's Mission, the rider switch. But I don't think she's going to be that short a price in this race, and she makes a lot of sense. Let's move on to race 10. We'll stay on the turf course and go down in age to the 3-year-old fillies, going 1 mile and a 16th, the grade 3 Florida Oaks, and a large field signed on here, Craig, oversubscribed. We've got 12 runners in the main body of the field, and I think we're going to have another favorite here that's likely to be a short price in the number 10 Free Look, and I'm not way against her. I mean, from just a likelihood of winning standpoint, she's probably the most likely winner. But it's the kind of connections and the kind of form coming in that says to me she's going to go off at a very short price. And I think this race is way more competitive than just conceding it to Free Look.
I do as well. It's a big field of 12, a couple also eligibles, even if we get some scratches. Not necessarily that those horses would be contenders in this field, but it would still make it a big field. And Free Look's going to have to overcome some things in here. She draws far outside in the 10 post. She's a horse who's done most of her okay running. I mean, she has good tactical speed. She's not like some plotter who's just going to drop back. So they're going to have to work out a trip from that 10 post then. I'm not so sure it's going to be easy. It's a race we have with a fast pace. I would say that's largely because of the field size. I think there's only one real true confirmed front runner in here, and we're not even sure about that horse because it's Dreaming of Snow, who comes off a win last out in the Suncoast Stakes, a race where she went wire to wire on the dirt, and now she tries turf for the first time. So I do think there is a lot of different ways you can go, and they don't actually, this race doesn't necessarily have to go through a horse who's probably going to be around even money or 6 to 5.
And we should just say, free look. I mean, she looks great, especially on the TimeformUS data. I mean, she's got the best speed figures coming in, and I'm looking at this pace projector, Craig, our new version of the pace projector, which you can check out on your DRF desktop PPs now. If you're used to clicking on the formulator tab in your DRF.com PPs, you can just move your mouse on over to TimeformUS, which is a new tab that you can access, and it's actually available for free for people who have Classic or Formulator subscriptions, at least for this month. So definitely check out the newly designed TimeformUS PPs. It's a beta version, so it's not fully functional yet. There's plenty of features that still have to be added in, but I know that we're big fans of the new graphics, so definitely go and check that out. And one of the things that I really like is the new version of the pace projector, where we insert the horse that has the best late pace rating marked in the pace projector, and that is free look, and she's shown in third place on the pace projector. So when the best late pace horse is that close to the lead, they're probably going to be pretty formidable. So, I mean, there's a reason that she's going to be a strong favorite in this race. I just think there are other ways to go, and simply looking at speed figures is not going to capture how much upside a lot of these horses have, and I think upside is what's leading us to a couple of the horses that we're particularly interested in this race, Craig, and I'll begin with the one that I'm interested in. I know that you don't disagree, and that's the number 1, Mission of Joy. This will be her stakes debut, so she definitely has some things to prove from a class standpoint, but I really like both of this filly's races since getting on the turf, especially her maiden win two-back, going the mile distance at Tampa. She was breaking from the outside post in a 10-horse field, took some stutter steps out of the gate that day, and just looked like a horse that was kind of saying for the first eighth of a mile, like, hold up, what's this under my feet? This is unfamiliar. She was kind of choppily striding along, but then once she settled into the race, you could see she started striding much more efficiently, and when they came into the stretch, even though she was covering more ground than the horses that she was trying to run down, she really lengthened her stride, lowered her head, and finished off that race very powerfully. And she came back and repeated that performance last time against winners. Got a better trip that day, really a perfect trip. But once again, I loved the way that she ran through the wire, and I just feel like there's real ability here. She hasn't faced this level of competition yet, but she drew a great post position down towards the rail, has a rider that's familiar with this turf course, and I think the Mission of Joy is going to run well in this spot.
I do as well, and normally I'd be a little leery of a horse who basically set the pace in very slow fractions and drew off, but we can see from her prior races, she's not really in need to lead. I think she just kind of took the lead by default because nobody else wanted it. She had good enough tactical speed to be there, and I just really like the way she finished off that race. Her maiden race was good as well, maybe even better, as you mentioned. The horse who finished third that day was in the Chad Brown barn and was pretty highly regarded, has since switched barns and won a very nice maiden special weight. I think it was at the fairgrounds in a new barn just a couple days ago, maybe yesterday or day before. I don't remember, but it was a good race. So she beat some quality competition that day, and she is one I'm definitely interested in. I think she's going to get a good trip from that inside post position and just be right there at the finish. Uh, I'll jump to the horse I made my top pick on our video preview, though obviously I like the horse you like as well, Mission of Joy, and that's the 8 Juniper's Moon. She is a filly from Anthony Dutro's barn, who I know we both liked last time. I think it was on Sam Davis Day when we did the forecast. And I've just really liked both of her turf races. She had some trouble the first time. She didn't have a whole lot of pace to close into that day, and yet she was making up ground at the end. And I liked the game that she showed last time. She improved her speed figure a good 8 points up to a 102. And I just like everything I've seen. And I can't resist a horse like this on a 20-1 morning line who is probably going to be that. Maybe, I mean, if you tell me she's 15-1, I won't argue, but I don't think she's going to be much lower than that given the other credentials we see on some of the other horses in here. And she's one that I think has real ability too and has every right to take another step forward.
I think you're going to get a good price on her, Craig, because she's a horse that looks a lot better on TimeformUS figures than she does on the buyer numbers. And it's debatable how highly you want to rate her last race, because there were a lot of first-time starters in there, inexperienced horses. But I know we had handicapped that race, I believe, on a prior forecast, and that felt like a race that might have had a lot of quality to it. Some first-time starters from powerful barns that looked like they might be good, and Juniper's Moon beat them all. So I think that she makes a lot of sense in here, and I think you're going to get a price, and she has a better chance of winning than her odds are going to reflect. So she's another one that I would use in this race. I'll throw out one more name that I think is going to offer value, and that's the number 7, Stephanie's Charm. Maybe she's more of an underneath kind of horse to complete your trifectas in a race like this, but she's the kind of horse I would use as more of a C type in a pick 5 sequence, because I think that she's run well in a couple of spots, especially 2 and 3 back, and has just sort of run out of ground in those races. It's tough to make those big runs from far back at Gulfstream Park, and she's put in powerful finishes each of those times, 2 and 3 back. Didn't run her race last time, but she didn't get the best trip that day. It was just wide around the course, around both turns. You can't really do that at Gulfstream. So I think she's a little better than she looks, and if this pace does heat up, she's one that will be charging at the end of this race, and is another one that really doesn't look sexy at all on paper, so she's going to be a big price as well, and I think this is the kind of race where you do want to do a little bit of price shopping.
Just a couple more I want to mention. One I don't particularly like, and one that is kind of interesting to me. Dreaming of Snow, who I mentioned earlier, shown on the lead in the pace projector. This one's not for me. She'll probably take some money off that win at Tampa in the Suncoast last time. If I remember, she even gets Kentucky Oaks points for that. Not sure what she's doing in this race. They don't run a counterpart on Tampa Bay Derby day for the fillies, so maybe it's just the logical spot if they don't want to ship. But turf, she just doesn't seem like a turf runner to me. Maybe she gets brave and runs away from them, but for me, it's a little hard to see, and I'm not going to use her. The horse that I think you have to have a little bit of an opinion about is drawn on the far outside, the 12 Ticker Tape Home. She is a filly who ran some really nice races at Woodbine. Her best races came in sprints. There's no doubt about that. One-turn races. Even her synthetic race was around one turn when she ran well, but she ran some serious speed figures in a couple of those. Speed figures that are better than everybody else in this field, including Free Look. They came as a 2-year-old. They tried her on the dirt last time in that race won by Dreaming of Snow. She didn't handle the dirt at all. She was up there early and just completely threw in the towel, but if you think she can get back to that turf form, it's just a matter of distance, and she's going to be a big price, so I might give her a shot as like a B or a C type.
Yeah, I will say Ticker Tape Home is entered back in a race at Gulfstream Park on Sunday, and I'm just checking right now. She is drawn on the also eligible list there, as is Grace Darling, so feels like she is likely to run in this spot, even though she's shown as being cross-entered. So just something to consider with those two horses, even though they're shown as cross-entered. I think they're likely to run in the race that they actually got into the main field of. And yeah, Ticker Tape Home, I have questions about the distance with her. She's a very headstrong horse when you watch her races at Woodbine. She really wants to be on the muscle. So from this outside post, especially with an aggressive rider on her back, you think that they're probably going to try to send her towards the front end, and maybe she'll get in a tussle with Dreaming of Snow. We'll see. But either way, I think it's a tough assignment for her to try to get this distance under those circumstances. I'm going to mention one more horse, Craig. The number 3, Alpha Bella. She's just a horse that I want to use in this race. I don't think she's going to be fantastic value. I don't love her. I just think that her last 2 races are solid. She was game to win her maiden race 2 back, and I thought that she ran a sneaky good race last time in the Sweetest Chant, because that was a pace that came apart, and she was wide the whole way, pushing the pace, and she was holding on pretty well at the end against her stablemate Cairo Consort. So I just think she's a horse that's doing well right now, is drawn in a good post, and should be effective in this spot. And at least she's going to be a better price than Free Look, who I don't think is that much more likely to win than she is. So she's one that I will use in my tickets. Let's move on to the feature race on this Saturday card at Tampa Bay Downs, the Tampa Bay Derby, mile and the 16th for the 3-year-olds on the dirt. And despite the large field, Craig, I think we're going to have a heavy favorite in here in the number 6, Tapit Trice. He's 8-5 on the morning line. Feels like he's 8-5 on a lot of people's Kentucky Derby early lines, because he is a horse that has gotten a lot of buzz looking ahead to the Kentucky Derby, even though at this point in time he has 0 qualifying points. That's likely to change after Saturday, but first he has to pass this test. And you don't always want to take a short price on a horse that has things to prove, that's stepping up against the toughest field they've ever faced. So I think he's got ability, Craig, but I do have some questions.
Yeah, there's some. I mean, he's not the kind of horse you normally think of on one of these 3-year-old preps that's going to come in and be a heavy favorite, when the best speed figure he's run, at least on TimeformUS, is a 105. His final time figure was a 107. Don't get me wrong, he did everything right that day. He looked very professional. He blew away a horse who was coming in off a fast maiden win in Shesterkin, a horse who's actually in this field. And one of the favorites. So it kind of tells you there's not a lot of depth to this field, because I don't see how anyone could watch that allowance race and see anything that would make you think that Shesterkin was going to turn the tables on Tapit Trice. So I do think he's a deserving favorite. I think it would be silly to leave him off a pick 5 ticket. I say that hoping you're not going to suggest that, but I don't think that you are. So I'm going to keep it pretty short in this race. I think he's a must-use. The only other horse who really jumped out at me as one that I do want to use is Bill Mott's Classic Legacy, who comes out of the Sam Davis at this same track. And he just seems like a horse to me who's improving. I do think he's going to get some pace. This is a big field of 3-year-olds. Whenever you get that, even if you don't know exactly who the leaders are going to be, we show 3 different horses right up on the front end. It generally comes true that you're going to get some pace. I've recently been working on that spreadsheet I do for TimeformUS. And one thing to note in the preps is you see a whole bunch more red fractions than you do blue, because there's almost always paces in these races. And that is one of the knocks I have on the favorite, by the way, Tapit Trice. Every race he's ever been in hasn't had much pace. He certainly seems like he can handle the pace, but you never know until they actually do it. So that would be one of the reasons I wouldn't single him. And my alternative, Classic Legacy, he's just a horse who will be running late. I think he's going to get some pace. I think he's getting better. He gets, obviously, a good rider in Irad Ortiz, has Bill Mott behind him. So he would be the alternative for me.
Yeah, there are a lot of points I want to cover in this race. I'll start with Tapit Trice, the favorite. And no, I am not going to recommend that people leave Tapit Trice off their tickets. It's just not that kind of race. He has a real ability advantage over this field. And I think what's really going to be dependent on his chances of winning is the trip. And the reservation I have with Tapit Trice is that when you watch all of his races, he has broken slowly every single time, and not just a little bit slowly. Like, he breaks a length behind the field in every race. So you do start to get a little concerned about that when you've got a 12-horse field and he's in the middle of the pack. And if he breaks slowly and gets squeezed back, sometimes, horses like this, they end up losing 3 to 4 lengths at the start of a race. Now, the good news for him is that there is plenty of pace in here, even if he is last in the early going, which seems very likely. There's a lot of pace to set up his late run, and he really does have a late kick, and he's overcome slow paces in all 3 of his starts, so a fast pace is supposed to, in theory, be even better for him. But he's a horse that is still learning. He's a little goofy. He's got to overcome this large field and traffic over a course, Tampa Bay Downs, that can sometimes be a little quirky, and some horses don't like the kickback there. So, there are some things to consider as potential negatives, but the horse that is, I think, going to be an extremely short price in this race, I just think he's so good, Craig, that I can't really be too much against him in here. You watch that last race at Gulfstream, and even after breaking slowly, he got right back into that race, albeit in a much smaller field, and the finish that he put in was just pretty devastating compared to his stablemate Shesterkin, who I know Shesterkin is the second choice on the morning line. I don't know how anybody could like that horse in this race after his last performance. He just didn't look like one that wanted to go longer, and frankly, I don't know if it's an owner decision, but I'm shocked Todd Pletcher's running him back in this race. Tapit Trice just looks way more appealing than that one, even at a short price. So Tapit Trice is far and away the most likely winner. I want to have at least one alternative, because when I go through this race and try to assess value, I don't really see Tapit Trice as being value. His chances of winning are probably about that 8-5 morning line, in my opinion, and I think he's going to be even money. So that means somewhere else in this race, there's got to be a horse that is going to be a higher price than I think their chances of winning actually lie at. And for me, that horse is the number 2 Classic Car Wash, the other classic horse in the race. And it's very confusing because they actually finished in a photo together in the Sam F. Davis, he and Classic Legacy. And I watched that Sam F. Davis a regretful number of times to try to figure out who got the worst trip. And I ultimately came to the decision that it was Classic Car Wash, because he had some stop and start moments at multiple points throughout that race, whereas Classic Legacy, who was kind of enclosing in tandem with him, he was wider for most of his trip, but really had that unencumbered run where he could build up momentum when he needed to, going around horses. Classic Car Wash, on the other hand, got a slightly more impatient ride from a rider who tends to be a little bit impatient, and after he got squeezed back heading into the clubhouse turn, he tried to make up some ground on the backstretch, was successful in doing so, but then ran into a little bit of traffic heading into the far turn, had to tap on the brakes, whereas Classic Legacy was moving forward outside of him, and he had a couple lengths to make up on Classic Legacy at the top of the stretch, and did well to rally between horses to actually stick his nose in front of that rival for third place at the end. And I want to recall, Craig, that Sam F. Davis day was a card that I felt like speed really had an advantage. And maybe the Sam F. Davis was the race that you would say that pattern broke a little bit, but just look at the running line of Zydeco, who's back in this field. He was a gigantic price that day and didn't look particularly competitive, but he still was in the mix until the very late stages of that race, setting the pace. It was not a race where horses that were coming from way back seemed to have an advantage, and I liked that Classic Car Wash just continued battling away and trying hard to get there, despite having to navigate way more traffic than other horses. So I think he's the one that you want out of that race. And just given the rider assignments, I think that Classic Legacy is probably going to go down off that 6-1 morning line with the switch to Ortiz. And I think Classic Car Wash could go up off his 8-1 morning line. So I want Classic Car Wash as my other horse alongside Tapit Trice, and they're my main 2 uses in this Tampa Bay Derby.
Yeah, I've got no problem with him. I don't think it's a race you want to go very deep in. We haven't even talked about the from the Davis, the runner-up Groveland is in here. I think he's the 3rd choice on the morning line. But to me, he just seemed like a horse who got a perfect trip that day. He was inside most of the way. He was up close to the pace on a day, which you said probably favored speed. We have it coded in pink by TimeformUS. It probably would have been red if not for the Sam Davis. That one probably skewed the algorithm just a little bit. So I don't think that was the strongest race, but I think the ones you want out of it are the 2 that we talked about it more so than Groveland. As for the rest, I'm totally with you on Shesterkin. I just, like I said, I don't see any way you could watch that race and think you could come up with a reason he would turn the tables. I just don't see it. And nobody else in here really grabbed my fancy enough that I want to go spreading too crazy in this race.
Yeah, and I said Classic Car Wash had the worst trip in the Sam F. Davis. He had the worst trip of the horses that ran the races, I'll put it that way. There were a couple horses that had significant trouble, like Champion's Dream, who just got completely sawed off heading into the clubhouse turn, and it seemed like that really affected his ability to run after that. And Prairie Hawk had a poor start and made a middle move, but they finished so far back, and I don't want to give too many excuses, Craig, to horses that lost by 19 and 20 lengths in a race that came back as slowly as the Sam F. Davis did. So I have trouble building a case for them, even though they had some trouble in there. And I agree. It's just a race where I don't think you want to go that deep. And my main 2 are Classic Car Wash and Tapit Trice. And I'll use a little bit of Classic Legacy, Craig, but I did prefer the other classic horse. Well, that takes us to the end of this Pick 5 sequence, and let's do a little bit of a review, Craig, because we covered a lot of ground here. We talked about plenty of favorites. I think some of them we want to use, some of them we don't. So let's just go back through, and I'll let you go first.
Okay, in the first race, that 3-year-old stake, the Columbia Stakes, I like Talk of the Nation. I have to use Freedom Trail, even though I think he's probably going to be overbet a little bit. I don't want to get eliminated on a horse who I think's going to get a great trip and have a way to win, have a pretty easy trip to the winner's circle if the horse shows up. I don't really care for Mo Stash in here. He wasn't for me. I'm okay with the horses you mentioned, Sandero and Western Yarn. This is definitely a race I want to spread around a little bit because I'm going to keep it short in some other legs. In the next race, the Challenger, you kind of talked me off of Skippy Longstocking. Like I was lukewarm on him anyway, but I said maybe I'd want to have him on my tickets. But those Safi Joseph stats, you make a great point about when the news starts hitting the fan. It usually doesn't go well for the barns. You had the numbers to back it up. So I'm going to use Trademark in there. Classic Causeway would be my top pick. And that's about it for me in that race. I'm going to keep that one pretty short. In the Hillsborough, the grade 2, I'm going to use as my top pick, I mentioned Gam's Mission. I also will use some Temple City Terror and Shanty Sara. I'm not going to leave her off my ticket, but that would be it. Just those three for me. The Florida Oaks, I'm going to spread around a bit more. I know we both like horses who are prices. Mission of Joy, I will definitely use. Juniper's Moon was another. Maybe I would throw in a horse like the 12 Ticker Tape Home as like a C. And even Free Look, I don't want to totally dismiss her in here. I mean, she could win, but she would be more like a backup, particularly on tickets where I have other favorites in the other legs. And then the last race, the Tampa Bay Derby, the big one of the day, which I'll be chomping at the bit to make the speed figure soon as it's over, but we'll have to wait another race because there's a maiden race after this pick 5 sequence. I think you have to lean on Tapit Trice somewhat, but I am going to use Classic Legacy, as I mentioned, as my second horse, and I'll probably throw in some Classic Car Wash as well. And I just couldn't come up with anyone else in this field.
Yeah, the first leg, the Columbia, I'm going to view as a spread race. I don't have a strong opinion, and I want to get through it, so I'm going to use Freedom Trail, Sendero. A Western Yarn is maybe a little more of a B or C type, but I think he's got some price appeal. And the number 10, Talk of the Nation, very, very logical. On backup tickets, I guess I could consider horses like Worthington and Most Dash, depending on how much I want to put into this. But those four that I mentioned first would be my main uses in the Columbia. In the Challenger, second leg, I'm leaving Skippy Longstocking off my tickets. A lot of people are going to single this horse in their wagers, and I have enough reservations that I just think you can really you can make this sequence profitable for yourself by exploiting the fact that his chances of winning are not going to be commensurate with his odds. So at least in my opinion, that's my opinion. I'm going to play it that way. So I'm leaving off Skippy Longstocking. I don't want to die on the classic Causeway Hill because I mean I like him, but I don't have total trust in classic Causeway. So he's my top pick in this race. But I'd also want to use Trademark a little bit. I do want to use the number 8 Business Model because I think there really is a chance this race could come apart, and he seems like the best closer, and a little bit of that number 5 Surly Furious, who I just think is going to be a gigantic price and is not out of the mix here. The Hillsborough, I primarily like Temple City Terror. I would use Gam's Mission. I would use Shantasara. But Temple City Terror, I'm hoping, is the price that I think she's going to be. And that would make her my top pick in that race. In the 10th, the Florida Oaks, I really like Mission of Joy. She's an A for me, and a race where I don't want to have too many other A's. I would use a little bit of Alpha Bella. As a backup, I mean, as a B or C type, I would use Stephanie's Charm. Depending on the size of my ticket, I'm kind of on the fence about whether or not I want to use Free Look. I'm not as against her as I am Skippy Longstocking in the prior race, but I don't think she's going to be a great value in this sequence. So I would want to use her with some other horses that I think are going to offer value in other legs, but I don't want most of my play going through Free Look. And I'd also use the horse that Craig likes, the number 8 Juniper's Moon. Then we'll close things out with the Tampa Bay Derby, where I'm primarily using Classic Car Wash and Tapit Trice, likely in equal strength, with maybe a distant backup as Classic Legacy. Greg, I think this is the kind of sequence that could pay well if we're right about it. It could certainly chalk out, but I don't want to be a winner if this sequence chalks out.
No, I never want to be a winner if a sequence chalks out. And honestly, we rarely see that happen at Tampa on these big days. There always seems to be a couple of prices that uh, leave most people scratching their heads. I know the Suncoast was that race for me last time in the Sam Davis sequence. But yeah, Tampa's one of those tracks that, like you said, some horses just don't seem to handle it. I would be surprised if it did chalk out.
Well, everybody, hopefully we gave out some good opinions that help you win at Tampa Bay Downs on Saturday. Everybody, thanks for tuning in to the podcast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch Craig and I recapping these races next week on the TimeformUS Pacecast coming up on Tuesday.